Hello, buenos tardes, a miei amici italiani, buonasera, a mes amis francophones, bon après-midi, and to my friends from Syria and Morocco, ehlen wa sahlen. Thank you to Susanna Medina and Marcello Sanchez Sorondo for organizing this conference, and to His Holiness the Pope for inviting us here. Thank you also to the courageous woman who stood up and showed us the face of human trafficking. Human trafficking transcends borders, and we share a responsibility to address this scourge. Canada's challenges are distinctive in two important respects. First, we have an Indigenous population that has suffered, and there are considerable problems, including an inordinate number of women from those communities who have been the subject of human trafficking. And second, we are a country of immigrants, which, for the last few years, has admitted approximately 300,000 new immigrants each year and plans to continue to do so. It is therefore incumbent upon us to try and understand the many peoples who now call Canada home. As judges, we must bear in mind the importance of denunciation, deterrence, and reparation to victims, but also the principles of rehabilitation and promotion of the responsibility in offenders. I will explain who the victims of human trafficking are in Canada, what steps have been taken to address human trafficking, and offer some suggestions as to how to address the challenges, including, firstly, encouraging traffickers are punished and victims protected. Secondly, understanding the root causes of human trafficking, including the cultural context. Thirdly, recognizing that both victims and offenders need to be part of the solution. And fourthly, coordinating our international efforts. Human trafficking includes sexual exploitation and forced labor. Canadian victims at risk for sexual exploitation are primarily women who are socially or economically disadvantaged, teenage runaways, and children in child protection. Although Aboriginal people represent approximately 5% of Canada's population, they represent the majority of domestic victims of sex trafficking and almost half of all human trafficking in Canada. Non-Canadian victims of human trafficking come predominantly from Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, India, China, and Eastern Europe. It is difficult to determine the precise number of people who are the victims of human trafficking because many victims are afraid to come forward. But we know that in 2013 to 2014, there were 330 reported cases of human trafficking that were investigated by police. This was up slightly from 2009. About 30 cases went to court, and less than half resulted in convictions. 25% of reported victims were under the age of 18. Another 50% were between the ages of 18 and 24. And 93% of reported victims were women. While the number of reported incidents has increased slightly since 2009, it's not clear whether that means that more women have been subject to human trafficking or that more women feel comfortable coming forward. Why do women become victims of human trafficking? This is Natalie's story. She's a young Aboriginal woman who was the subject of human trafficking in Canada. Natalie just wanted to belong. Her home life was troubled, parents who drank too much, an abusive boyfriend, and a sense that she just didn't fit in. So although she was only 14, she moved in with members of a street gang. They were her family, her protectors. She began to sell crack for them, and then she started using as well, which cost money. That she didn't have. Suddenly, her protectors took control of her life, where she could go, who she could talk to, and even fighting for her, as though she were a piece of property. And there was only one way to pay the debt: to sell herself. Along with crack, they trafficked her. She believes that she nearly wound up among the more than 1,200 Aboriginal women who have gone missing or been murdered in Canada since 1980. We do not fully understand why Aboriginal women are trafficked at a disproportionate rate. A 2014 study for Public Safety Canada suggests that it may be because of the physical and sexual abuse experienced by Aboriginal students in residential schools, denial of their cultural identity, violence, and marginalization. Widespread addiction has made matters worse. They live in deplorable conditions. International victims of sexual exploitation often speak a language in common with their traffickers, but do not speak an official language of Canada, those being English and French. And they are therefore more dependent on their traffickers. Moreover, where a woman's immigration status is connected to her trafficker, she may not want to sever ties with that person for fear of being deported. Many are afraid to go to the Canadian authorities. Victims are often recruiting, using coercion and physical violence, such as the pimp who acts like a boyfriend, using love in combination with physical violence or threats so that the victim does not recognize that they are being trafficked. Victims of forced labor arrive in Canada with papers for fake or real jobs. In many cases, they're contract or seasonal positions. Women are typically offered jobs in the entertainment industry or as waitresses or nannies. So what steps have been taken in Canada to address human trafficking? My colleague adverted to some of them this morning, so I will only briefly touch on some of the highlights. Canada was among the first countries to ratify the United Nations Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons. Consistent with that commitment, in 2005, the Criminal Code was amended to add specific offenses to deal with trafficking in persons under the age of 18, benefiting economically from trafficking, and withholding or destroying identity, immigration, or travel documents to facilitate trafficking in persons. Canada may now prosecute Canadian citizens and permanent residents of Canada who commit trafficking offenses throughout the world. In 2014, the Government of Canada enacted the Swedish model, making it illegal to purchase, but legal to sell, sexual services. The Criminal Code also contains measures designed to make testifying less traumatic for victims, such as a screen that prevents the witness from seeing the accused, the use of closed-circuit television that permits the witness to testify from outside the courtroom, and the presence of support persons in appropriate circumstances. In addition, the court can issue a publication ban to protect the identity of the victim. New legislation has been proposed but not yet passed that would create an evidentiary presumption to facilitate proving human trafficking offenses and modify the provision that imposes a reverse onus for forfeiture of proceeds of crime for certain criminal organizations and drug offenses to also include human trafficking offenses. In 2012, the government enacted a national action plan that was focused on 4 core areas: the prevention of human trafficking by training frontline workers, raising awareness and supporting communities to identify people and places most at risk, protection and assistance for victims, detection, investigation, and prosecution of offenses, and creating national and international partnerships and knowledge sharing. One of the challenges moving forward is that traffickers need to know that they'll be punished, and victims need to know that they'll be protected. Like all criminal proceedings, the onus of proof that must be met to obtain a conviction is very high. It's also difficult to convince witnesses and victims to come forward. This is particularly true for vulnerable people. Police agencies have begun to respond to this concern by taking a more victim-centered approach and by establishing better and open lines of communications with sex workers, building relationships with support agencies, and having victim witness personnel on hand during the trial to assist the victim. And they have recently introduced dogs that may also help the victim feel more comfortable in certain situations, and it's been quite effective, both with women and with young children. More work needs to be done to assist victims to put their lives back together after the trial is over. We need better housing support for trafficked women and girls, better treatment for mental health and addiction, education and income support, and more funding for prevention and awareness, including culturally sensitive Aboriginal-led funding initiatives. Secondly, we need to understand cultural context. It's important as judges to know what we do not know, that there is often a cultural context that we do not understand, but which is important to understand the victim and her reaction to trauma. Moreover, the lack of trust among many members of our Aboriginal communities makes it difficult to bring educational programming that is used elsewhere to Aboriginal communities. It is therefore important to include the community in efforts to remedy the situation, to hear their stories, to enable them to be part of the solution. Canadian sentences must be sensitive to Aboriginal communities and their traditions, and community elders should be consulted and involved. For new Canadian victims, the challenge is to reach out to those who are often poor and without family or other support systems. Different ethnic community associations, of which there are now many, and members of police and other authorities who understand the cultural context are valuable tools to put victims at ease and to ensure that not just the text, but the subtext is understood. This is important for early detection of problems and the provision of adequate support. Thirdly, it's important to recognize that offenders need to be part of the solution. Violence against women is not just a woman's issue, but a community issue. Many offenders, even those who commit very serious crimes, will someday be released. And often, they too have been subject to abuse and/or neglect. It is important, therefore, not only to focus on denunciation of these terrible crimes, but to address what methods are most effective to change the behavior of offenders. Awareness campaigns in schools, workplaces, and elsewhere are important. So is having women in places of responsibility in all aspects of society, so that all members of society become accustomed to seeing women in positions of power and respect. Having counseling available to offenders and programs in place to enable offenders to secure meaningful employment when they are released from prison is another important means to provide offenders with the tools to enable lasting change. And finally, the coordination of international efforts. Unlike the United States, Canada has neither a broad national coordinating body to tackle human trafficking, nor a detailed annual report on trafficking. There is no central data collection mechanism. Better data collection is a necessary part of identifying victims and addressing challenges at an early stage. More effort is needed to support international efforts, such as XVI.As-supported programs to target women and girls living in poverty, to address the underlying causes of entry into human trafficking circumstances, and to improve data collection to better understand what works and for whom. Judicial education programs are also helpful to promote education on human trafficking to judicial partners. I'd like to finish with this. Inside the Holocaust Museum in Washington, there is an inscription. Thou shalt not be a victim. Thou shalt not be a perpetrator. Above all, thou shalt not be a bystander. Ladies, I think that's why we're here. Thank you.